actually at the event?
I was.
Yeah, so I didn't meet you up there.
I was there the full 3 days.
Yeah, bad of me not to bump into you.
We'll bring Laura in because she's on the panel as well. So, morning, Laura.
Morning.
Morning. Thanks for joining. Really, really appreciate that. And we've got Simone, Adrian, and Henry on the panel as well. So, do you know any of them, or do they know you? I don't know.
I know of.
You know of.
Shall we say?
You know of. Well, Laura, meet Simone, Adrian,
Hello.
and Henry.
Nice. Good to meet you.
So it's really kind of you to give us your time, Laura, as well. And we are recording now for our sort of video media tab. We'll post usually after the event on our website, and it's fairly informal, and we ask people to raise a hand and interact. And Henry's good at that, and I'm good at sort of poking people to talk. So we'll wait and see what comes. Henry's sent a list of things that we potentially could talk about. But again, if you guys want to raise any other areas, then we can do that. So.
How are you going to do this, Steve? Are you going to allow everyone to have 5 minutes and then kick on, or are you going to ask questions of the panel?
I think what we should do is I'll obviously I think the panel should introduce themselves. You know, a very short "Who are you?" And then we should start with the first topic. Go around the panel on the first topic, and then encourage people to interact. That's usually how I think it would work. So,
who's asking the questions? You.
I can ask the questions if you want me to ask the questions. Yeah, you happy to me to do that? Yeah. Okay. There's 33 in the lobby at the moment, so I'll enter them now. So hang on. Right, admit everyone. There we go. Good morning, Ian. Good morning, Chris. Good morning, Adrian. Good morning, Simon. Good morning, Bryn. Good morning, Georgina. Good morning, John. Lots and lots of people joined this morning. Welcome, everybody. Welcome. If you've just joined, if you could kindly mute just to cut out any background noise, that'll be excellent. Thank you very much. Unless you're a panel member, of course, Laura, Henry, Simone, and Adrian. But if you just joined the event, please mute just to cut out any background noise. That's fantastic. Thank you very much. And yeah, that's excellent. No, it's 10:32. So the first things first, welcome everybody to this morning's Pension Playpen Coffee Morning. This feels a little bit like Match of the Day, post-match analysis of the event in Manchester last week. Some of you may have attended and some of you may not. So really appreciative of our illustrious panel, including Simone Lavelle and Laura Amin, Adrian Fennell and Henry. And I think Podrig's on as well somewhere. So if he's joined, yeah, I think he's there. Yeah, hi Podrig, thanks for joining the panel. So today is post-match analysis on the PLSA's conference. We've got some 5 or 6 agenda topics to discuss with the panel. As usual with Pension Playpen events, we love interaction. We'd love you to raise a hand and unmute and agree with our panel, disagree with our panel, challenge our panel, or raise something entirely different. But as long as it's to do with pensions, I guess will be great. So first of all, we are recording. So is everybody happy that they're being recorded? Chris, Simone, Bryn, everybody's happy that they're being recorded. So that's great. And I think what we'll do first, I'll obviously monitor the lobby, but I think what we'll do first is introduce our panel. So ladies first, Simone, would you like to introduce yourself? Then we'll pass to Laura, then to Adrian, then to Henry. So Simone, if you'd like to go first, and quick introduction of who you are, and what your role is, I suppose.
Yeah, that's fine. Thanks, Steve. So I'm Simone Lavelle. I am now CEO of Pi Partnerships since a year now in the seat. Before that, I've been working at Avida, Cardano, you name it. Did lots of different backgrounds in the pensions industry.
So I'm Laura Min, I'm a partner at LCP. I am scheme actuary, but also I advise corporates, so I kind of see both sides of the fence, obviously on different clients. I'm a DB specialist, I guess, so that's my particular area of expertise. Obviously, lots of interesting discussion in that space at the PLSA, so looking forward to chatting more about that today.
And good morning. I'm Adrian Fernell. I'm currently Secretary of the Trustees of an energy company, as well as being an independent professional trustee with other clients as well. Prior to that, I was the AA Saga Pensions Manager and quite a number of companies as well with various roles for the last 4 decades, actually.
Hi, Henry Tapper. I guess my question in my head is at sort of 95k a standard at 6k per person. Is the PLSA a very expensive trade show, or is it genuinely a representative of pension thinking in the UK at the moment? So that's kind of like what I've been thinking about in my head, and I guess something I'd hope we get from this meeting today. Some kind of answer to that question.
Thanks, Henry. And Podrick, do you want to just briefly introduce yourself as well as a panel member? I'm not sure if he's muted or unmuted.
Sorry, so, as I've said in the chat, I'm as far as I'm aware, I'm not a panel member. I wasn't at PLSA, so I'm even more ignorant than normal.
No, I know, but I've invited you as a panel member because you're very vocal and you are a famous journalist in our industry. So I think you deserve to be on the panel.
Now, that's what you mean.
Exactly. Okay, well, thanks to the panel for that. As I said earlier, if you'd like to raise a hand and ask a question, then please do. I think we'll start off with the first question. And the first question was, and the first topic covered at the PLSA was, what do we want to do with the liquids, and when do we want them? And I think the brackets not yet potentially. So maybe Simone as the lady and the first lady, I guess, on the panel. Would you like to start on that, and perhaps we'll go around each panel member and talking about illiquids and whether we want them or not.
Okay. I think illiquids can work, but maybe for bigger schemes that have, a more long-term horizon, etc. I think we've all seen last year with the LDI crisis that actually liquidity is the thing most pension funds are after, especially with the focus to buyout. So I think actually for most DB schemes, illiquids are probably not the right investment class anymore. Also hearing about when funds do want to go to buyout, they then struggle, or then the hurdle is really how to shift these portfolios. And then they have to sell them at a discount, which is actually defeating the whole purpose of why they went in there in the first place. So I think that is my stance on illiquids.
I'd agree with Simone, except to the extent that one thing that irked me at the conference was the number of people that kind of dismissed DB schemes. There are a large number of DB schemes still in existence with a large number of members. I'm secretary to one as part of the Electricity Supplies Pension Scheme. We've got 40,000 active members with future accrual still being accrued, and so therefore, from an asset perspective, illiquids it does fit the bill up to a point, because our timeline is not the next 10 years, 5 years, it's 40, 50 years. So we could appreciate illiquids in a way that other funds can't.
That's an interesting point, Adrian. Actually, was one that was touched upon in one of the panel sessions. I think it was pensions in 2035. So John Chilman of the PLSA and of Railpen mentioned obviously the Railpen scheme being open to accrual, the potential use for them effectively of illiquids given that longer term time horizon. Yeah. I think illiquids is an interesting topic as well because it touches on 2 key themes that for me arose during the conference and are obvious key themes in our industry at the moment. So those being consolidation and the shift to consolidation. Obviously for illiquids you need scale. Is consolidation the route to achieve that in both the DB and the DC space, frankly? And then also productive growth, the growth in the UK economy and productive finance, the Treasury's kind of key focus at the moment. Obviously illiquids or productive finance assets tend to also be illiquid, and so there's a clear kind of obvious link there. It was kind of funny in a sense, slightly dark sense perhaps, that we were in Manchester talking about investment in productive finance and infrastructure, given the news of late around HS2, and that was commented upon. And at one of the sessions, where the Minister to the Treasury dialed in, Andrew Griffith. A few pertinent questions were asked of him in terms of, this desire for productive finance investment versus the government's approach to infrastructure investment with the likes of HS2, and unfortunately I don't think we got clear or straight answers from him on any of those questions. It was a very much a politician's answer. It was in a sense a lesson in how to give those answers, I think, his response to those questions.
Yeah, I think there was quite a lot of talk about illiquids in DC, possibly in CDC, although CDC is another topic, so I'll put that to aside. Really interesting comment from John Rowe of Legal and General, when asked when he thought Master Trusts would be likely to adopt a large amount of illiquids. He said that Master Trusts were very wary of illiquids because were they having to divest of large amounts of their members because an employer withdrew, they might well find that they hadn't got the capacity to do so because the illiquids would stand in the way. So there was a kind of we'd like illiquids but not yet type feel to the LNG presentation I heard. And I heard that from other sort of areas of DC people I spoke to, people saying, we aren't quite sure about the vehicle, we're not sure about LTAS, we're worried about whether or not LTAS will get gated, and we're still worried about daily pricing and issues like that. So I think a lot of the things which the government sort of assumes will happen when schemes get big, they weren't really happening in the heads of some of the people I spoke to, the sort of CIOs and CEOs of the larger DC schemes. I'd be interested in Laura's view in particular, and Simone's view in particular, sort of on as consultants, whether you get that impression. But it was my comment was, we'd love illiquids, but not quite yet.
Is that more a selling point, Henry, as much as anything? In other words, it's like a marketing tool. Are they not being marketed correctly in order to actually encourage funds to actually want to buy them? Because there just isn't the knowledge.
I think there's all kinds of things going on, Adrian. One of them is the dual default concept, where master trusts are competing at a very low cost default without any liquids, and then they have a high profile default, which is the one that they sell to the market as being our sustainable in ESG stroke social impact illiquid type portfolio. That's the one which the customer has to pay a lot more for, and ultimately probably they buy at the low cost, and they hope that they'll move towards a sort of more illiquid default. That's the kind of commercial angle that I'm seeing happening with one or two master trusts. Again, the vast majority of money still seems to be flowing into the low cost passive areas.
I think to your point, Henry, the kind of market development, the market reaction to this in terms of what products can we develop, and frankly at what cost, because as you mentioned, in the kind of master trust space in particular, ultimately it does all come down to cost, frankly, especially with the default. I think there's a desire for liquid investment, particularly shifting back to the DB side space, Adrian, as you said, for those schemes that do remain open to recall, all those schemes looking for runoff. There's clear discussion now following Mansion House around runoff being a potential alternative to buyout, and potential for sponsors to share some upside in that through use of surplus. So I think there's a shift in perspectives, but I think the market needs to innovate and catch up with that shift in perspective in order to make accessible illiquid investment effectively.
Yeah.
Okay. Con, do you want to unmute and ask your question? Because it's a good point, isn't it, really, about valuation? But go on, you ask it.
Yeah, it's a very simple point. But my question is, did anyone discuss the valuation of illiquids? It's distinctly a problem area to my mind.
Yeah.
I think it was raised, Con, in the context of in the DC space, recognizing that perhaps collective DC as a means of moving away from the need for daily valuation and then managing valuation of illiquids in that context in terms of transactional kind of activity. So illiquids could have a role in CDC, that their illiquidity, effectively their lack of transactable day-to-day market value, might not be a barrier to effectively.
Yeah, I mean, one of the problems you have with daily pricing is, you have an event which knocks the value of illiquid rates rise or whatever it is, and it takes time for that valuation to actually show up in the fund. Now, in that situation, the Spark members are going to transfer out of that fund because they'll be getting the old higher price, leaving a much gutted fund for those who are slow or not following closely. There's a real problem for fiduciary duty in there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that
my question was it discussed? That's
no.
Which you've answered. Thanks.
Yeah, there were lots of discussions about fiduciary duty and about whether or not trustees should be taking a long-term view when there were short-term problems ahead. Yeah.
Okay, Peter, you had your hand raised. Did you want to ask a question, Peter, or?
I was just going to make a comment to answer Con's question. Can you hear me? All right.
Yes, we can. Yep.
Yeah, I have microphone problems from time to time. I was alerted to the issue of pricing of liquids by Henry's blog before the conference, and I was very interested in the topic. In the DB session, I didn't hear much discussion about pricing of liquids, was what I was going to say.
I think it was touched on predominantly in the DB session around the perspective of the secondary market. So to Simone's point earlier, the fact that for DB investment, with it being longer term, that the daily dealt pricing difficulties of illiquids is less of a concern, but actually liquid pricing does become a concern when you're looking at that endpoint. And if you're looking to transact to take advantage of opportune pricing, then we need a effective secondary market to be able to facilitate that at a value that's accountable for members.
I think they're also in the room, although it wasn't really touched upon, is the fact that the next election in the next year or so, in that everybody was kind of positive in one hand and sort of not quite sure about where it was going in the long term post an election.
Yeah, we had a session which a number of Labour Party pundits sort of turned up and wanted to talk about what they thought the Labour Party agenda would be for next term if they were to get in. There didn't seem to be an awful lot of discord between what was currently going on and what they thought likely to happen in the future. I don't know if anyone else on the panel wanted to comment on that.
I think I just agree with you, Henry. So there seemed a lot of kind of cross-party agreement around pensions and the need for a longer-term solution. I think they recognise that this isn't going to win them the election. So looking for specific opposite kind of points of view here isn't vote winning.
No, and there was a session in the PLSA also about one of the last sessions about what would a new Labour government do. But very little specific came out of that in terms of really, change of tack or change of policy. There wasn't a consensus that was going to happen.
It was fairly muted, wasn't it, Simone?
It was very bland. Yeah.
Yeah. I was expecting some fireworks. I'm not getting.
Me too. Me too. I thought, okay, now we know what to do, but no, no. Yeah.
Shall we move on to the next?
Okay, the next, well, assuming there are no other questions on illiquids, but it's good to get everybody's questions and feedback on those that attended. So the next question is about DB scheme surpluses, all that surplus money that all these schemes have got, maybe. Do we want to start there, Simone? I mean, you're Pi Consulting and I'm sure a number of your clients say, what do we do with these surpluses? But this was raised at the PLSA. So what are your thoughts?
Well, just to correct it, I don't consult myself. I'm just doing the chief exec sort of side of things. But I do know from certain schemes that have a surplus in the DB side, there's negotiations with the corporate about how to possibly use that in the DC and move it along. I think, why not? The companies run the risk before, and why shouldn't there be a slight upside for them as well? I don't disagree with that. It's just that I find there was another event I attended where this was also discussed, and almost as if every fund that's now in a surplus has all these options, but who says the surplus will stay? I mean, how do you actually, can you really lock it in as such that you can really use it? I think that's where the big question is for me. And it's also depending on what is in the trustee and rules, how this can be used. It's all not as clear cut as it all sounds. And my biggest thing is, with the increasing in interest rates, that's where the surplus is coming from. But given the complex world around us, God knows where asset prices will go to. So this is absolutely not a given, in my opinion.
I mean, the Pensions Ombudsman issued a decision yesterday about the return of surplus to an employer. Admittedly, it was on a wind up. Okay, so it was quantifiable, but a member of the scheme objected that the surplus went back to the employer, and the Ombudsman decided that yes, it was a legitimate use of the surplus to go back to the employer. But it was interesting, they said that the trustees had taken all reasonable steps and taken all the decisions in the right way, but another set of trustees may have made a totally different decision. So I found that quite interesting. It was sort of, I like what you've done, or I accept what you've done, but another set of trustees could have decided something totally different. I think this will run and run.
Can I jump in there?
Bryn, you're waving your hands ferociously.
Sorry, Bryn.
I'm not quite sure Adrian's got the nuance of what happened there right, because effectively the Ombudsman didn't give a ruling on whether the refund could have. What the Ombudsman said was it wasn't a matter for him, but under the relevant legislation, it's for the pensions regulator to adjudicate on that. Now, I was at a meeting with the pensions regulator last week, and the truth is they're not geared up to do this at the moment. And there's also the legislation isn't the same for a refund on wind up and a refund on from a continuing scheme. The wording is different. I would argue that the responsibilities of trustees are actually the same, whatever the wording. But it's down to the TPR to decide whether or not it's reasonable to make a refund. Obviously, it depends on the rules, and the actual administration is for the Ombudsman, and that has to be done right. But the TPR just aren't on top of this yet. They accepted that it was something that was going to come, but it's uncharted territory here. The Bristol Water case was interesting, but it certainly didn't resolve the issue of when a refund can be made and the circumstances in which it can be made.
Laura, it's your turn. Please come in here because I think you can speak.
No, well, I was just reflecting on so you're completely right, Bryn, in terms of the different circumstances of ongoing versus wind up, and obviously the ongoing piece is the piece that was is the real piece for debate in the context of the Mansion House reforms, in the context of use of illiquids, in the context of productive finance investment, because that idea of the ability to run on with a investment strategy that supports or is supported by the funding strategy, and which is sufficiently de-risked, to Simone's point, that you're comfortable that that surplus that you've got won't be eroded over time to the extent that you then start to risk any members' benefits. I mean, that all in itself is up for debate, and the point around the erosion of surplus or the risk to members' benefits, I think there's talk around the use of PPF protection in terms of this super levy to underwrite investment in more risky, frankly, assets than the gilts and LDI, which schemes are otherwise kind of piling into ahead of buyout. So it's an interesting debate, and then that's the whole piece around actually accessing surplus or having surplus to access, and then there's the question of who accesses it and who has the ability to access it. So members, trustees, sponsors, who has their slice of the pie, and does it reflect the extent to which an employer has previously contributed? Does it is it kind of circumstantial in terms of, you could claim that some of the recent improvements in funding levels have almost come to those sponsors who have perhaps been less diligent in their attempts to de-risk the scheme, and have been fortunate effectively through market events for that to have landed in their lap, so to speak, in terms of now being in a better funding position than they might well have otherwise have been. So there's a broad brush of questions for regulators to evolve and be able to answer.
It's interesting too for LGPS, who've got the option of reducing employer contributions, and there were some interesting discussions early on in the sessions on the Tuesday about whether the social utility of keeping money in the public sector being spent on essential services was more important than overfunding a pension scheme, which seemed to be what all LGPS schemes were doing at the moment. So that was an interesting adjunct to the surplus. There was also quite an interesting debate right at the beginning, which Sarah Smart brought up, where there was actually a conversation about whether DB schemes might want to reopen, actually start accruing again for new members, or maybe for members who'd stopped accruing and wanted to restart. And I mean, my general point on this was that this was a radically different approach to anything that we heard in previous years. I've been going to these things for a long time, but it's not really been since the late 90s that we heard any talk of that nature.
Okay, so thanks, Bryn, for your question, and Laura and Simone, thanks for your answers. Peter, you've got your hand raised for some time, but there's a lot of other questions coming in. But Peter, do you want to ask your question on this particular subject?
It wasn't so much a question, but just a point. I have put a personal submission into the DWP consultation, suggesting that we should set up a surplus distribution plan for DB pension schemes, to operate almost as a mirror of a deficit recovery plan, and controlled by the pensions regulator. To do that, to determine whether there's surplus, we shouldn't use the valuation method that is currently gilts plus mark to market, but use a cash flow model, and that should be projected forward for 9 years, 3 valuation cycles, and the surplus measured on that basis, on a cash flow basis, which would show the need to sell capital assets as well as the revenue income streams against the outflows of the scheme. That could then be modified if circumstances changed, and so the surplus wasn't distributed unfairly to the employer. And the employer could then use that surplus to fund future benefits, as it can do in the scheme, and whether they be DC or DB, that wouldn't be necessarily required on that, but also make it available for the employer to use that surplus to fund benefits outside the scheme, such as the CDC arrangement. And also it may have applications where the scheme is in consolidation, has been consolidated, and to allow the consolidator to extract profit, which was one of the reasons that the pension super fund failed in getting TPR regulations. If I'm prepared to set that out a bit more detail if anybody wants to discuss it with me, but I just was floating.
Well, have you got a copy of the paper, Peter, and then we can send it to any interested parties? So that'd be cool.
Yes, I'm slightly hesitant about this. Henry has said he will publish my submission. I submitted it anonymously to the DWP because I was reflecting a group of companies which I hadn't got permission for them to, hadn't discussed it with them beforehand, but I'm more than happy for Henry to publish it on an anonymous basis. And for those in this group, know that it's attributable to me. But
Yeah, I'm sorry not to have published it anonymously. I did promise to do so. It's excellent, and well worth consideration from the sort of the wider group here.
I would be very interested in feedback on that from other people.
It sounds really interesting just from how you described it here, Peter. What was your thinking, or what have you put in your note in the context of kind of the IRM approach, so the investment lens through all of this? If you're willing to share.
It's a question to Peter. Is he still there?
Oh, sorry, it was to me.
Yep.
Yes, sorry, yes. My view was that that would allow the trustees the discretion to decide whatever assets were appropriate. You were talking about, obviously it depends on there being a surplus, and so in a sense the employer's covenant risk is not so much of an issue there, because the scheme would be funded on a self-sufficiency basis going forward, and it's basically the excess over the self-sufficiency. Does that answer your question, Laura? Sorry.
Yeah, I think so. Just in terms of the investment angle, so it's full trustee discretion. No,
provided the surplus is measured, it is a genuine surplus and not just a result of a valuation variation. And the two risks obviously is the the discount rate risk tied to interest rates. The second is mortality risk, and my suggestion was that you ignored mortality in your assumptions about the future cash flows. So and just took it on a scheme experience basis. So to put it crudely, if a member dies, you get the benefit after they've died, but you don't anticipate it in terms of distributing cash.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Peter. That's good. If any of you who weren't at the PLSA have any other ideas on what to do with surpluses, please raise a hand. Con, I'm going to come to you because you made an interesting point in the chat, which is to do with member contributions. Is that fair or not, Con?
Well, the point I'm making is really a very simple one. With contributory pension schemes where the member, the employee, has made contributions, it cannot possibly be equitable that all surplus goes back to the employer sponsor. And I think the lawyers would see that off in very short order.
What would happen today if that happened then? That happens today. Do the lawyers challenge or not challenge? Laura, do you know if there's any challenges on that basis or?
I think it ultimately depends on the wording of the rules. It's the lottery kind of rule drafting, but there are or reference was made actually at the PLSA itself to the fact that with use of surplus and if that becomes kind of more mainstream, to use that language, then there needs to be a rethink potentially of how distribution is equitable or could be made equitable between members, scheme, employer. I think maybe perhaps that speaks to your point, Con. It's all quite circumstantial at the moment, but perhaps there could be movements to make it slightly less so, I think, at a high level.
Bryn, you got your hand up.
Yeah, just to come back. As I say, the wording is different between in-service, continuing fund and wind-up. Where the fund is continuing, the trustees, it says explicitly in the regulations, I can't quite quote the exact words, I've got it here somewhere, but it has to be in the members' interests. The trustees have got to say it's in the members' interests for this refund to take place. What that means in practice is obviously depend on the rules, depend on circumstances, and everything. The people who decide if that's challenged at first point is TPR, is their job. And they haven't thought about it at all, what line they would take on these issues.
If I could just add that I think it's highly unsatisfactory that TPR has not grasped the net as far as super funds are concerned. And they still talk about profit extraction in a very negative way without giving any formula as to how profit might be extracted based on the fact that anyone who puts capital behind a pension scheme ought to have some return on that capital. I know it's a frustration to editorialists. I'm sure it's a frustration to Clara, where they're less vocal about it. But I really do think that we'll come on to this with regard to the super funds in a moment. But it's one of the big barriers to seeing consolidation in happening. But nobody has adopted anything, and that's why I'm so impressed that Peter's actually come up with a formulation, which I have shared actually with Pension Super Fund.
So as a panel, are we surprised? Because we're 18 months into the Ukraine-Russian war and interest rates and everything else moving. Are we surprised that the regulator's not ready for these events? Is that a surprise for everybody or not surprised?
Well, it's 6 years since the consultation or the original idea for super funds, 5 years since the 2018 consultation. You would hope since 2023 Mansion House DB options paper that the pension regulator would be ready, but clearly it hasn't happened. So I am surprised.
Simone, have you got an opinion on that?
On the super funds?
No. On the regulator, we were on surpluses still.
So, are you still on surpluses?
Yeah, as to whether the regulator should be ready, because now is the time, maybe.
I think probably, but as I think we were saying, it's all also depends on what's in the trustee and rules. So it's quite bespoke for each fund, how this can play out. I'm also not convinced how many funds truly are in surplus, because also a lot of our clients, sometimes there's trustee boards who say, okay, well, everything's been happening in the market, and why don't we have a surplus? Well, you've been totally hedged. So it's not true for everybody. And I just am not sure for how many schemes this really is a reality. And I can also see from a regulator's point of view, they have a lot of juggling to do with where they spend their time and priorities. So I don't know where this fits in with them.
I think, Simone, I'd agree on your latter point. On the first point, I think there is, generally the concept of surplus and on what measure that is I would say generally quite well understood across the industry.
Yeah.
I think perhaps with the events of this time last year or earlier October last year, we as a collective, the DB universe, kind of got ahead of ourselves through circumstance, and TPR was just not ready for that. They were still waiting in the wings with the second draft of the funding code consultation, which then completely got waylaid and redirected. And it feels like they're playing catch up, frankly. And they're still working through the second funding code. Goodness knows when it will actually finally come out. I understand DWP regs are to be laid in November, which predicates the funding code. But yeah, it's a challenge around, I think, being in catch up. There's been changes in personnel, as we know as well, and it just feels like they've been caught slightly unawares, much as we all were, frankly, in terms of the LDI crunch.
Yeah, and then there's the question as well: is the funding code, is it still relevant? Is that still necessary? Given what's happened last year.
Or does it need to evolve? Yeah.
Well, has it not fast tracked where the industry is going already, in a way?
I think we're ahead of the regulator on the funding code, Simone. And they're still playing catch up, and despite what Nautica said, it's coming shortly and it'll be relevant and everything. I'm not convinced. I think they just need to rethink it.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps they are. Perhaps I'll be optimistic and say they are.
Yeah. Okay. Chris, you got your hand raised. You want to quickly ask a question or make a point?
Oh, cheers. Yeah, thanks. Well, it's two things really related. The first one on the surplus. I mean, if there's a deficit in the scheme, where there's no question that it's the employer that pays the deficit. So, in terms of a surplus arising, to my mind, I don't agree it should all go back to the employer, but I can see a logic that potentially it should. But the sort of main point I wanted to make was in terms of the members that benefit from a surplus. And we kind of assume that the members who should benefit are the pensioners in the DB fund. and actually they've already got DB pensions. It's not those it's not those members that need the money. It's the people who are in the new schemes, the sort of the auto enrollment minimum DC pension funds. They're the ones that could really benefit from the extra money that is, and you're quite right, Simone, it's not all pension schemes, but in certain DB pension schemes, the extra money that's arising, they could really benefit and have their sort of outcomes helped if the money went to them, rather than shoring up and even more gold plating the DB pensions, to my mind.
Chris, I agree with you, and I from memory it was referenced, this concept of use of surplus for DC and CDC during one of the panel debates, and I think it was referenced in specific by Sarah Smart of the regulator. So there is a recognition that that could help to address intergenerational fairness. I guess it's about putting in place the framework to enable that to happen, because currently, you know, when your DC is not in the same trust, it doesn't work mechanically.
Okay.
And hi, good to
Cheers.
see you again, Chris.
Yeah, good to see you.
Oh yeah, you know each other, don't you? Yeah. Anyway, no, moving on. Peter, you got your hand up, and then we can move on to the next subject. But yeah, let's hear your question, Peter.
Yes, no, it was about this relative members to benefit from use of surplus. One of the issues I think is the relevant as to whether and this seems to be a situation that's been looked at by the Ombudsman when he's been considering the cases that we've mentioned, and also is the extent to which inflation protection has been built into the scheme before the surplus is considered for distribution, and the suggestion as to whether the caps that have been applied retrospectively and in the future should be disapplied first before the surplus is then considered for distribution, and the trustees having to act in the best interest of members. This is the background to that. So just a little side on.
Thank you, Peter. Yeah. So as we're in DB land, maybe Henry, we should move on to super funds and DB consolidation. Should we have a quick session on super fund consolidation going forward? So Simone, your opinion on DB consolidation and super funds. What was at the PLSA? What was the message? Is it a good thing, a bad thing? What's going on?
Well, I think I attended that session, and it was with DWP, Fiona Frobisher, the PPF, David Taylor, and then PwC, Stephen Sopra. I think what the PPF said, that if policy were to change and government would actually, encourage setting up a super fund under the PPF, they would be ready to do that. And then I forgot, it was the Clara was there too, and they've been struggling sort of to get going with the consolidation. And then the other points that were made, it's all good and well talking about these consolidations, but then first of all, there are big decisions to be made, and that will take time to get people on the same page of that. And also the transitioning to super funds, they're big processes to do, and there's a cost involved. So it's not all as an easy story as you think it is. And I thought it was a very good session, because it's sort of the realization as well, big transitions, big decisions, therefore it could take time. And I think the point was from Clara is that it's like, the first sheep needs to go over the dam, and then and more will follow. But it's much slower than was expected, this consolidation. I don't know who else was at the session, but I thought it was a very good session.
I was at that session, yeah. Sorry, carry on.
No, I was there too, Henry. And what struck me is that consolidation is very much, there's different tiers, as you call it, or different parts of the market, arguably, in terms of consolidation. So there was discussion of consolidation at the small end. On the DB side, obviously, DC value for money is pushing small schemes, DC schemes potentially that way. And how could that DB consolidation at small end be facilitated? Talk of the role for the PPF potentially there, or some other form of public consolidator. If not the PPF, then who, was the question raised, I think, during the panel debate. But then at the larger end, the kind of roles for Clara and the like. And actually, frankly, I think it was PwC who referenced, consolidation, or if there is a strong use of surplus kind of framework and clarity to all the points we were just discussing in the previous part of our debate, then arguably there's less of a shift to consolidation for the larger schemes because they will just seek to run on because they already have that scale. So question of scale and different subsets of the market, I think.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point about the market for consolidation, because PPF are saying that there's no consolidator who wants the small schemes. LCP are saying that we can look after the big schemes. There's this gateway in place which stops any scheme that's in surplus from going into a super fund, because they should, according to the PRA, buy out instead. And actually, there's a very diminishing talent pool for the super funds to go after, even if the issues of price extraction and some of the capital requirements behind super funds were cleared up. Obviously, super funds withdrawn, pension super funds mothballed itself and awaits any further developments without great excitement. Clara says it's going to get 10,000 members by Christmas, or at least its chief actuary said at another session that was the case. And the PPF continue to bang the drum for them to become a sort of a consolidator with some kind of crown guarantee standing behind them, because of course there is nothing behind the PPF at the moment. It is effectively a CDC scheme. If the PPF went bust or couldn't meet its obligations, it would have to reduce its benefits.
Just to note on your point, Henry, around the larger in the market and the LCP reference, that was rather than to any specific product or consolidator, it was to the concept of run on and sharing of surplus, but only subject to the fund being in a low risk investment strategy, sufficiently in surplus on a low risk funding strategy, and with paying that super levy for the 100% PPF protection. So it's not the concept of a consolidator, but rather the ability to run on with sufficient protection for members, but also then enabling sponsors potentially to benefit from upside through surplus, sharing of surplus.
It wasn't discussed, but there's also quite a lot of conversations going on between schemes with weak covenants and those with capital who want to provide capital-backed journey plans. And it may well be that the market for super funds is kept alive for schemes with weaker covenants.
Which arguably was always going to be their main market share or target market back at least in the kind of 2, 3, 4 years ago.
Yeah, okay. So there was quite a lot going on behind the scenes on super funds, but frankly, the consolidators weren't able to talk to an agenda which said these are the deals we've done, because no deals have been done.
Yeah.
Okay. Not to hop on regarding the point about the PPF, but Con, you're saying PPF becoming a consolidator is a recipe for disaster. Could you expand on that, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the current rules and the current requirements of people like the super fund, with respect to the regulator, the regulator, for example, is going to have to approve every transaction going into the super fund. Well, I mean, you get the PPF there, along with TPR's requirement to protect the regulator. It's clearly a recipe for disaster. Conflicts all over the place. Yeah, Ian and I wrote a very long critique of the PPF submission to the DWP. Frankly, I'm minded to write an even further one, because there's a lot that we left out of that, because the people who wanted that were specifically looking at their role in forming a consolidator. But there are far broader criticisms that could be applied to the PPF with respect to its current model as a protection fund. I mean, the idea that you could even consider taking some of the surplus that is there in the protection fund and applying it to this purpose is frankly appalling. The conflicts between, but I mean the issues which are clearly insurmountable are, could the PPF actually satisfy the requirements that the regulator has set, the gateway tests and everything else, the capitalization tests? Could they, could the PPF satisfy those? And the answer is almost certainly no way. So,
we'll have to wait and see what the autumn statement says, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, we'll see what. Yeah, we'll see what the statement says. Padraig, you've got your hand up, and you're decloaking as a panel member now, Padraig. So there you go.
Yeah. It's a point I touched on when we had the PPF guys on before, but I'm rather concerned about the conflation of a number of different themes, not by anybody particularly here, but generally within the conversation within the industry about productive finance, about super funds, and about the potential for consolidation. I'm with Con on PPF. I think having a consolidator in the market, which expands the role of the PPF, has all the problems he's raised. My concern is also that it would be considered the de facto default, and it would take any competition out of the market. Who's going to invest in systems that will manage schemes and members' benefits if they're going to go up against somebody who ultimately they can't really compete against on a level playing field? The biggest concern for me on that score is that you have something that has an association with the government. It doesn't take very long for the government, when they wish to interfere, and you just have to look at the history with PBGC. Everything was going great in terms of their funding until there were political decisions to drop things like Bethlehem Steel in there, which suddenly put it into the red. So we don't need any political intervention as far as that's concerned yet. Unfortunately, we seem to be having a discussion or a debate. Generally, the politicians seem to think everybody is on side about, whereby we need to invest more in the country and we're going to plunder the pension schemes to do it. Now, I'm concerned that there seems to be an implicit consensus just because the parties aren't talking about it, because they're not going to win votes on it. But the fact that we see that there is an implicit consensus could mean a party gets into power and they've got a considerable majority, which may not be the next parliament, but the one after. We may have no power to try and resist some crackpot scheme like the Tony Blair Institute came up with. And so unless we really hold their feet to the fire about what their policy intentions are, we could get shafted. And not just us, all of the members out there. And none of us will get what we want, whether it's some form of CDC. It'll be just some horrendous bugger's muddle to satisfy whichever party gets into power. So that's my concern. There is all of these things are becoming conflated, but there's this implicit consensus is what worries me most, and we need to really keep on top of these politicians so we understand what they want. Anyway, sorry, that was me.
It's a great rant. It's a great rant, Corey.
Excellent rant, Padraig.
Rather bleak picture for us for the outlook. But, yeah.
Bleak picture.
Yes. Bleak anytime you like.
Nice. Okay, I'm conscious of time. We need to move on to pension freedoms and rewind pension freedoms, bring back the annuity. Is this something that the PLSA discussed, and why would we do that? Let's talk about pension freedoms and rewinding pension freedoms. What was the angle there? What was the angle?
Well, it was Standard Life and others. The insurance companies are absolutely cock a hoop, but they've at last got a marketable product in the annuity, and more or less took over the DC agenda through large numbers of sessions, which seemed to be entirely about them. So run by them in the audience, them asking the questions, and it was as if there was no alternative. At one stage, I actually found myself in a session where I actually forgot, that 2014 ever happens, and then I woke up to discover that yes, we still have pension freedoms, but we won't have for long if the insurance companies have their way. Sorry, that was my rant.
Wasn't it? Yeah. Laura or Simone, were you in, or Adrian, were you in these sessions regarding pension freedoms and annuities?
No, not in that sense, but there were some other sessions. It was more for DC in terms of decumulation and all those questions about how, you know, that the market still doesn't really have a proper offering that is clear, and you know, maybe there should be like 3-4 offers there next to having your insurance annuity that people actually can choose from, rather than having like everything, you know, all the flexibility, which is only extremely confusing for any member that is facing this. So there was a discussion about it, but not with a clear idea what that, you know, what they were going to offer on it. And then because there isn't, so then immediately to your point, Henry, it goes straight back to the insurance offering, because that at least is clear. So I think that's what I took from that.
Very well put. Yeah, very well put.
And I think related to that, there was some discussion at some of the panels around the role for TPR and the role for FCA in a space where you might have master trusts providing decumulation products or accessibility versus the kind of contractual space, the insurance space, and then who regulates what, and is there a potential for regulatory arbitrage between the two regimes?
I think Standard Life are trying to drum up business. I mean, they're trying to create a market. Or recreate a market, perhaps is a better way of putting it, in annuities. Perhaps this is their first foray into finding out whether it's actually going to take off or not. But I must admit that, you know, it was a bit of a hard sell, if I can put it that way.
I'm glad you felt that way.
Chris, you got your hand raised. What did you want to ask a question, Chris? Or
Yes, can you hear me?
We can hear you. Yeah, we can.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, I just wanted to raise something that it formed part of my submission to the DWP, so it is in the wider domain. And those who follow me on LinkedIn, I produced a blog that says we need to de-stress rather than de-risk our DC pensions, and essentially it revolves around the fact that yes, you could look back and say what happened in 2022 was unfortunate, but in reality, the gilt market fall in 2022 was something that was actually predictable. It was an accident waiting to happen, and there's lots of people who've lost out. And essentially, the argument in my blog is that really, in a world of pension freedoms, if you thought about how you would design a DC arrangement, if you never had compulsory annuitization, you wouldn't create effectively cliff edges at the point of retirement. You would actually look to build a to and through system. And ideally that to and through system where you would have your, if you like, your lifestyle approach or your change of investments from growth to generation of income through different types of holdings, and use that income to actually match pension payments going forward. So you'd accumulate income up to the point of retirement, and then from then on, your portfolio would generate predominantly income to make your pension payments. And that is a far less risky approach than the way we do it today, which is essentially a capital drawdown process, and you're at the mercy of markets every month or quarter whenever you draw down your money.
Thanks, Chris.
Okay, Chris. Any response from the panel on that one?
No, I think I can remember a conversation years ago with Don Ezra, who was also on your page, Chris, on that it's not just this cliffhang. People live longer, so even if you work to sort of 75 and then you start to think about how you're slowly going to decumulate, but it leaves you far more in the market with your money, and have more control about, you know, because you don't know how healthy you are, how you're going to, you know, what you're going to need. So there's more thinking about that, but I forgot his whole specifics framework that he thought out, but it's along your lines. Yeah.
There was an excellent section from Stefan Lundberg and David Bird about these issues, and it isn't all one-way traffic towards there was quite a lot of talk about CDC and how it might work. The difficulty really is nobody's come up with a commercial CDC product which can be integrated into the master trust as a decumulation only, and nobody's prepared as yet to replicate the Royal Mail model. Where I thought there was most interest was in areas like TPT, who have got multi-employer capabilities to operate CDC master trusts and have got the client bases already. So TPT were quite interesting in conversations on their stand, openly talking about converting the SHPS scheme to CDC for future accrual. USS have also been talking about whether or not the teachers who are going to be stuffed by the teacher scheme employers who are going to be stuffed by the escape rates in November might have a CDC alternative going forward. I felt that there was quite a lot of DB to CDC conversations, but the DC to CDC conversations are still very weak. That would be my observation of the conference.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah,
I'd agree with you there, Henry.
Yeah, okay, excellent, thank you. For anybody that wasn't at the PLSA, have you any other questions of the panel on hot topics, hot subjects that you'd like to know about? Or does the panel have any thing to say on any subject that we haven't discussed that would be hot off the press for this session? Sorry, Laurie,
I'd only mention AI. There was a particularly good session on AI, which was both frightening and inspirational at the same time. And it certainly kept the people in the conference talking for 24 hours on and off on it.
It was an underlying theme, wasn't it, throughout in terms of digital transformation and member engagement as well. If I may, just if for anyone that did miss the PLSA, we've LCP run Beyond Curious or LCP podcast, and we did a number of recordings with the speakers from the event. So if you're interested in the podcast, you can listen back to some of those interviews that got a bit of the behind the scenes of the various speeches.
Could I ask you, Laura, because you were one of the organisations that did cough up best part of 6 figures for a stand. Did you feel it was value for money?
I was not party to any of that discussion around what was invested to provide the stand. I mean, and also that there was a clear number of clear continued interest in investing in that way from all the players that were able to present and be there. And it was a great event, I thought, in terms of the collaboration across the industry and working opportunities.
I mean, my observation was that it was a brilliant event because it was full. The stands were full. It buzzed and whatever. I'm still, thinking in my head, did I attend a trade show, or did I attend what the PLSA sold it as, which was kind of like thought leadership, etc., etc., etc. And I think it's a bit of both. Do I think it's value for money? Well, I think there's an awful lot of excess, and I mean, I really do. I think we've got to cut back on some of this champagne swilling, which has seemed to have come back into fashion. My final question was, do you want another glass of champagne? Which seemed to be the question I was being asked every time I walked into the exhibition hall.
Well, Henry, the answer there for me would be quite simple because I don't really drink. So there you go.
Good for you. Good for you. Before we finish, there was a question from Adrian Balding, who is industry guru on that sort of stuff. Adrian, did you want to ask your question about Nest, or just raise a point?
I was just asking whether there was any discussion at conference on the merits of Nest becoming a CDC scheme. I mean, I come from a background. I think Nest has been very good for the DC market. It sets down a benchmark for value for money. They've been innovative in their investment approach, and they've looked at sort of exciting sidelines like their sidecar savings scheme to see whether they can branch out and do other exciting things. So would they be good for the nascent CDC market? And was there any discussion on this at conference?
Not that I heard.
Not that I've heard. No.
I think it was touched upon at one of the panel discussions with the CEO of Nest, but it was very high level. But just a recognition that, or I think the question may have been posed to her directly, that given the kind of target market of Nest, yes, perhaps CDC might be an angle or a direction they might want to take to support members kind of more efficiently or effectively on their route to retirement.
Elizabeth Fernando was there as a speaker, but Nest were very absent in terms of they had that Zoe Alexander there, but really there wasn't that kind of buzzy Nest stuff we've seen sometimes. They weren't really big time. Very few of the master trusts were exhibiting. I think
Yeah.
TPT was probably the only one.
Yeah.
No. Yeah.
Excellent. Excellent. Thanks for the question, Adrian. And well, we're sort of out of time to a great extent, but I wanted to thank the panel, especially Simone, Laura, Henry, and Adrian for their time and their input. Some fantastic questions from the audience as well, which is brilliant as usual with Pension Playpen. Thanks to Padraig as well for being sub, came off the bench and asked a question. So that was actually fantastic.
And
Today's well, indeed. Today's session, as I said, is recorded, so it will be on the Pension Playpen website this afternoon for the recording. If anybody does want to follow up with any of the panel members with content, links to other events, that'll be great. I know Stephen Glover, for example, there's an event with the TPR talking about policy making, and that's in the chat as well. That's an event that Stephen Glover's running in a couple of weeks. But it's a great session. I think everybody's been very impressed with the panel and very impressed with the questions. And we've got a lot to do as an industry. So thank you very much, Simone, and Laura, and Henry, and Adrian for your input. So that was fantastic. Next week, we have Aaron Muralidar, who has been on before some time ago, but he's going to tell us about his ideas for selfies and an update on what he's done in Brazil. And I think he's doing some stuff with the Italian government on how we can think about investing in future savings in a different way. So Aaron is a fantastic speaker. He's going to have to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning because he's on the east coast of the United States, but he's a great speaker. So if you want to enjoy Aaron's thought process and presentation next week, please join us next week. So thanks to everybody for joining today. As we say, as usual, let's pray for peace in the East. And now we're saying pray for peace in the Middle East. And let's hope that there's some movement there to at least have a ceasefire. So thanks everybody for your attendance today. Really enjoyable session, and enjoy the rest of your day. And thanks for your support of Playpen. And if you're not a member of Playpen, please join. And if you are a member of Playpen, thank you very much for being a supporting member, and we really appreciate your input. So have a great week, and we'll speak at the next session. Thank you very much indeed, everybody. Thanks a lot.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Thanks all.
Cheers,
Bye.
Simone. Cheers, Laura.
Bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye.